myself a little something here. No. Oh my god, that's hot. Here.
Is that fried chicken?
It's burritos and a little bit of mixed vegetables. bad. I was eating breakfast. I didn't want to put anybody on camera who didn't want to be, but... Oh boy. I've talked a lot on my live streams about just moments in life that have really bothered me and still do. It's all there. I keep mostly every single live stream up because, you know, and a lot of them I talk about really deep shit, you know. At some point and another, it's just kind of hidden in there, but, you know, it's findable, you know. I feel like with an AI video tool, it could be easily found or something, but, you know. But, you know, I like to keep everything up because, you know, this is also information that I'm going over, and sometimes I even find out. But, you know, that's not what happens every time. That's more of like that's a special kind of day, you know. But honestly, like, the way I go about life completely changed at a certain point where, like, you know, this is not the type of, like, lifestyle I always had where I'm thinking about deep stuff all the time. And it was only really until, like, I found myself in, you know what I mean? And really just situations where I felt trapped and like I had nothing else to do, you know. I had my first shrooms trip when I was 12 years old. And I didn't know what I was doing. We found them in my grandma's drawer because she took them for my brother at the time. And, you know, and me and my brother fucking dosed up because we didn't know what was gonna happen, you know. All we knew was like, oh, they're drugs, they're cool. And then we took them and we started tripping, and it turned out to be something completely different than I could have possibly imagined. And I had a fucking little ego death. But, you know, and then, I don't know, I just kind of tried to forget about that because it was really uncomfortable because, you know, it wasn't a bad trip, but it wasn't a good one either. It was more like I fucked up and now I'm learning a lesson. That's kind of what it was like. And, you know, I feel like drugs really changed the course of where my life was headed. Not necessarily for the better or worse of things, you know, because I was already headed down a shitty path. Drugs just kind of changed the way the shitty path was going, you know what I mean? Like, it was absolutely awful in school. I did not do well at all, like, until I went to a more private school, and then I actually did better. But, you know, public school was awful. Every second of it. There's not a second I wish I would have stayed, you know, because it was fucking terrible. I hated every second of that shit, you know. I once made a girl cry because I was fucking being mean. And I didn't give a fuck, you know. Literally, I gave zero shits. In fact, I thought it was actually kind of funny, which, you know, it wasn't, but, you know. It's like, it's just a nasty little shithead, you know. Who came from a fucking long line of alcoholics, and yeah, no bueno. At this point, I'm just a big fat hippie. I feel like that's what I am now. It's just a big hippie, and that's just kind of what life is at this point. You know, very ritualistic. You know, there is no more just taking mushrooms on a whim. There's setting up an entire weekend and putting it aside and making sure everything is exactly how it should be before I do it. And, maybe once every year or so, like, when I was younger and dumber, I was fucking around all the time. I almost tried ketamine once, literally, like, so close to trying it. And then I called my friend and I was like, hey, guess what I'm about to do, man? And he was like, if you do that, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. So I was like, okay, I won't do it then. So, yeah, that didn't end up happening, but I was going to. And I was going to do it with mushrooms. I think everything just became about drugs. And it's not really like I had too many interests to begin with. So there wasn't really a compelling reason not to. I mean, they were fun and, they took me away from the shit I was in. I started stealing when I was fucking 8 years old. And I would fucking literally so cringe. Me and my brother would walk around and find cigarette butts on the ground. He would give me the filter and he would take the part with the tobacco. So, not best, but it wasn't, I was young, so I wasn't, to me it was cool to smoke cigarettes. And now it's just like food or water, something that I feel like I need on a daily basis, constantly, every second of the time, or else I'm fucking just a little bit extra unhappy. But that doesn't really bother me too much, because it's like second nature. It doesn't really matter, because I can get it whenever I want, nothing's stopping me. I don't know. Before I wanted everything I want, before I wanted everything I wanted, and now I just kind of want, like, oh, I forgot the weed, damn it. But, I don't know. I don't really want everything I want anymore. I just kind of want things to work out and not be awful. Like, I want things to be the least inconvenient they can. Once got like 6 months of community service because we were at this festival. My friend saw this lady's vape sitting on her booth, like side table, and it was a mat table. It's not like it was like shiny plastic where if you drag something across it, it's not gonna make a really loud scraping noise. It's gonna make that bitch immediately turn around and realize what we're doing. So we both got arrested and detained at the library. My friend got a day in juvie, and I fucking got 6 months of community service. Met a bunch of people, and we would just kind of vape in the back of the fucking van while we were waiting to go to our next spot. But honestly, like, I wouldn't change a thing. I would much rather prefer what I had over what I could have had, which was, I don't know, nothing, no one. I consider myself pretty lucky to have the friends that I have today, especially because of the type of person I was and still am. I just wish I did more fighting, because we do these friendly fades all the time. And whenever somebody was like, okay, you're fighting Gabe, I'd be like, no, I don't like fighting. I don't want to do that. But I wish I would have just kind of done it, because that would have made things a lot more interesting. But, I actually did once, and it was under the most annoying circumstances. I was high and my friend was drunk. And we fought each other, and I made him cry, and I felt like shit. And it was awful. You know. I don't know. You know, I did have a roof over my head, though. And, you know, sometimes even if it would take a day or two, eventually I would end up eating something. So, there's that, too. Like, you know, fucking, I don't want to say this inside because he's apologized like a million times for it, but, you know, we're pretty hard to control. Kids, we were pretty hard to control. And, you know, so she would just make us stay behind her couch, throw a bunch of blankets on there and stand on them. So, you know, fucking managed to crawl away one time, and she was like, oh my God, you know, and she was like, oh my gosh, you escaped Satan and crawled to the light. And I was like, nothing. I didn't say anything because I was fucking just in shock from being fucking stood on, and I couldn't breathe and I couldn't move, and it just sucked and that was just because I went across the street, you know, and I wasn't supposed to go anywhere. But, you know, in all fairness, if she didn't do that, then I would have just gone right back out there. But, you know, because I liked to go wherever I wanted, even though I wasn't supposed to, you know. Even though I was fucking really young, I liked to go wherever I wanted, and I liked to walk there, you know, and I liked to steal because I could get candy and drinks, you know. And then when I was a teenager, I started stealing money from my family, and that's not good. That's not something you should do, you know. I think over the course of that time period, I ended up stealing like at least $300 or more just to fucking get nicotine and weed and all that good shit, you know. Hey. A lot of regrettable times. A lot of things I wish I didn't do. A lot of things I'm pretty okay with and wouldn't change. But I made a lot of mistakes. At the end of the day, things just happen, and there's some things you do where you just wish you never did it, but it's not like you can change the fact that you did. So do better, and that's all you can really do, you know. And then I met my friend Tomb, probably to this day, probably my best friend in the entire world, honestly. Like, I'd put him right there at the top because, you know, like, hold on. I hated furries a lot. Like, the first interaction we had, we were sitting at the same table and I was talking about how disgusting furries were. And, you know, that made him really uncomfortable, rightfully so. And, you know, I felt bad. So, you know, I apologized, and then, you know, we actually became pretty good friends. And, you know, that's when I learned, you know, You know, you can always put your issues aside most of the time, you know. And actually got a bit of a perspective change, which, you know, which wasn't something that happened often at all. I was hard-headed as fuck, you know. Very hard-headed, very unwilling to see it a different way because I didn't care, you know. Because if it was cringe, I didn't like it and it was stupid. And, like, whatever. Oh, Jesus, I kind of broke the live stream. Yeah, you know, everything was so weird all the time. You know, it wasn't bad, it wasn't good, it was just weird all the time. You know, like, everything always happened in the most unusual way it possibly could have, you know. And then, you know, I'd go and watch these movies where everything was like normal, and I was like, why isn't my life like that? You know? Because that's what's normal, because it's on TV, which is pretty much one of the only things I, like, was like, I don't know, I really liked TV. I would watch all sorts of fucking TV, but, you know, up until we didn't have cable anymore, but, you know, I watched, because I went from watching cartoons, and then I just started watching Adult Swim all the time, because, you know, none of that shit was even nearly as funny to me. I thought Adult Swim was way funnier than any cartoon I'd ever seen, like, especially Family Guy. And so, it's just like, fuck SpongeBob. They're not over here talking about fucking, you know, talking about all these really funny-ass things. So I just completely lost interest in all the cartoons that I liked because the adult ones were just so much funnier. And, like, you know, because I was a fucking little shithead. I had toilet humor all the time, you know. Even to this day, it's like, you know, it needs to be at least a little bit inappropriate to be funny at all. And honestly, like, I'm truly a result of my experiences, I feel. And that's just, you know, like, most of my knowledge about navigating through life are do's and don'ts, you know, trial and error. Like, do this, don't do this. You know, like, for example, yesterday I almost fell asleep at work, and now I have in my mind, if there's nothing to do, I pick up a broom, you know, because you can't stop moving in a warehouse. And I didn't even know that. It's not like I've gotten huge trouble for it or anything, but it didn't look good. Just like not showing up today looked absolutely terrible. Probably the worst mistake I've made in quite a bit. And it's because I was, you know, I gave in to my fucking very tired self that would have been gone in just a few hours if I just would have fucking drinking an energy drink. But, you know, instead, I just decided to take what felt most convenient, and now look where we are. It's just, and it wasn't. So, you know, they said it'd be fine. It's not fine to me, though, because, you know, that doesn't look good on me at all. It looks kind of like shit, actually. And, oh yeah, I need melatonin, but they're like $16 per bottle for a half bottle. It's ridiculous. So, although, you know, I have someone bringing me melatonin, so that's a little convenience right there. Sometimes it's really hard to get to sleep, especially when I'm really fixated on a video game. It's like, you know, like, I don't really think this, but it's almost just like, you know, in that moment, I'm just like, fuck it, nothing else matters except for what I'm doing right in this moment, because I'm having fun, and I don't care. But it's that exact way of thinking that just puts you back so much farther than you really want to be. Because that's just what life is. It's just doing shit you don't want to do just because you have to. And everything outside of that is fine. But I didn't used to think that way. If I didn't want to do it, I wouldn't. I just, plain and simple, I just wouldn't. And I wouldn't really give a fuck about the consequences, you know? I don't even know how I graduated high school. I was really late on my graduation. And, you know, my grades weren't doing so great at the time. But for some reason, I just graduated anyways. Part of me thinks it's because they just wanted to get rid of me. But that's stupid, because that's not how life works. But I don't know. You know. Oh God. You have no idea how much I wish I would have just said fucking got up just like I did yesterday. I don't know why I decided, you know, because I'm sugarcoating it. It was really more of a decision. It was like, I'm just too tired. Fuck this shit, you know? And it was just another one of those moments where I was like, I don't give a fuck about the consequences. And that was stupid. But, you know, and the worst part is like, you know, if I experience those consequences for long enough, eventually I just don't care and everything goes back to the way it was, where I don't give a fuck and nothing matters. I'll do whatever I want, even if I suffer a little bit along the way. Which, you know, it's not. And I really try to keep myself away from that attitude because, you know, that's why I spent a year in treatment. Not specifically that, but, you know, it's kind of one of those things that just kind of led up. It's the stick that broke the camel's back. So, you know, dude. Just learned a lot of hard lessons. A lot of shitty ones, too. But, you know, in the grand scheme of things, they were useful. They were very useful. Because, you know, when you actually get to see what happens, when you just kind of decide to hit fuck it, then you don't want to do that anymore. That's also what they call it, like, when you're trying to stay sober and you just kind of get a case of the buckets. That's what they call it. God. Man. Oh, no worries. Hey, dogs. Just over it. So at the end of the day, like, I carry my own weight, and I'm heavy. I'm a skinny guy, but I'm a heavy-ass motherfucker. You know what I mean? Like, mentally. Because my brain doesn't like to just do what it doesn't want to do, you know? That actually makes me very mad, and I just have to end up swallowing it and forgetting about it because at the end of the day, you know, I'm never going to win that argument with myself. You know, I'm doing something I don't want to do, and I just kind of have to be like, you know, it's like the opposite. Fuck it. It's like you have to kind of have that attitude towards your own personal desires. I don't know. Life isn't easy. Thanks. I got it from a really good friend of mine. He's a cool dude. He showed me some of the best tea I've ever tried in my life. Not gonna lie. I'm still definitely ordering some of that shit. Like, I really like the silver needle tea. That one was nice. Should probably put this in my pocket. I shouldn't just be carrying a fucking. Okay. I don't know. It's just weird being on this side of the fence, you know? Because suddenly it's easy to just think that everything is against you, when in reality, you know, you just don't know how to properly handle a situation. And the only experience you have is fucking like 4 years of trial and error. I'm just over it, you know? Because there's a lot of people who just don't even, they just do it and it doesn't even matter. You know, like, I just get really cringe when I get stressed out. It just gets really cringe and annoying, you know. It's just like, I'm kind of a pussy, I'm not gonna lie. Like, a little whiner baby, but, you know, fuck it. You know, I just gotta do what I do to make myself feel more justified in the way that I feel about the situation, but not necessarily do anything that compromises my success, which is harder than it sounds, especially when you're as hard-headed as me. You know, and then we get into the belief system where I really have to just accept that I really don't know the definitive truth. So, it doesn't matter what I say, it doesn't matter what I think. I don't know. That sucks. Because I like being right. It makes me feel smart. But in reality, it's kind of something that makes my belief system a little bit weak. Because I have biases, which are probably some of the biggest weaknesses when it comes to believing in anything, in my opinion. It's biases. They're so annoying. So hard to get rid of. It's so frustrating. But let me make it clear, I ain't no fucking Puritan, okay? Puritans can suck my ass, in my opinion. It's solely mine. But, you know, I'm fucking, you know, I have a view on the way things should be, but oftentimes when it comes to the way it works in my head, you know, I feel like I navigate how much I give a shit about these things through feeling. So, like, sometimes I feel like, you know, what's even the point in believing in anything? Because it's not gonna change what's directly in front of me. But it kind of can, actually. It's just, you know, after you've scaved over quite a few different belief systems, it doesn't really have the same effect. Like, at first, you're like, oh my god, you know, I believe this way, and everything's all spiritually significant now. But then you find a new piece of information that completely humbles that experience. Suddenly, you're just like, damn. Well, looks like I'm starting from scratch. All over again. You know? Square one. I thought I was smart. Not even close. And, you know, some may wonder, like, why I don't go to college. one little short, simple answer to that. I hate college people. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to go to college. I'd rather just continue to struggle with the way I already am. Because maybe if I have like maybe one day if I'm doing pretty well and I have things in a pretty nice little place where I can just kind of do some stuff. But these days I don't feel like I would really last long, especially because of how easy it is to hit fuck it. And in treatment, like they tell you a lot of the time, like this isn't gonna be like a magic trick where it's just a magic wand. They constantly make it clear to you that, they say this isn't actually gonna help you without actually saying that, That's a pretty cool rock. And they say that without even actually saying it because, at the end of the day, was it kind of a bougie treatment center, And I was not spiritual at all during that time. It's very connected with AA. And personally, I'm no Christian. Not even in the slightest tiny bit, Because I don't want to be. That's not where my interests lie, And, the only perspective I've ever gotten on that is it doesn't matter if you want to be, treating your belief system like it's just like work where it doesn't matter if, it's convenient or not. You gotta believe in God so you don't go to hell. I'm just like, no thanks. I'd rather live a less, in my opinion, confined belief. I'd rather be able to believe in whatever I want, whenever I want, because at the end of the day, there's no definitive proof for anything. So, I don't know. It's a lot of shit. I'd say I'm doing better now than I ever have been, though. And at the very, very end of my treatment, after I felt like I had achieved so much and gone on such a long fucking journey, they told me I was an attention seeker. And I was just like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's true then. What am I gonna even say to that, Like, what am I gonna tell you I'm not? And waste my time on someone who doesn't deserve it? I don't think so. So I'll just leave and take what I learned and use it to better my life, And it's because in this group, they were calling this other guy an attention seeker. And I was like, I don't think that guy's an attention seeker. I just think that guy's having a bad day. And it sounds like you're just making it worse. And nobody liked that. Nobody liked that response at all. So that really just kind of sucked. But I did have one really good therapist. And I specify one because there was another one, but I mean, she didn't do nearly as much for me as he did. I mean, not even close. You know what I mean? The only thing, it was like with one therapist, it was validating and I felt listened to and respected. And then the other therapist, it was like all she could, her entire fucking base of knowledge was based off of statistics and you know, it was just like, I don't know. It felt more so like she had done this 100 times and, you know, she was kind of outside of the session. I was in and she was just kind of outside of the session, just dealing with another fucking emotion, like mentally ill fucking incel, basically. So that didn't really help. Not the best attitude, not gonna lie. You know. Yeah. I shouldn't, but you know, I switched therapists, which I shouldn't have done. That was kind of my big mistake there, you know. Seems like she was more of a business therapist and less of a like, you know, I have deep emotional problems therapist. Like how to deal with your coworker who maybe called you a bad name and suddenly you feel a little bit sad. I feel like that's kind of the therapist that she was trying to be. That's what it felt like. You know. But at this point, you know, defensively, I attach myself to nothing because, you know, like, what am I gonna do? Just give someone the opportunity who thinks they know more than me to try and talk down to me? That's human nature. That's what people do. They talk down to other people when they feel like someone else is wrong, for the most part. That's what the average, like, belief system person does, you know? Like, for example, my sister's attempt at debating, she likes to try and make you feel bad so you'll just believe what she believes because you feel like a bad person, which that shit doesn't work on me. So, you know, still love her and she's my sister, but that's not going to work on me because I'm not an idiot, you know. Called me a fascist. Like, oh, okay, let me just go to my camp where I have all my Jews because I'm such a fascist. Let me just walk down the street to my camp, you know, where I'm running this inhumane operation. Of course, you know. It's like, you know, a lot of misused words, you know, a lot of over dramatic statements, and you know, a lot of people will say that's invalidating, but you know, yeah, let me just walk down to my camp because I'm such a fascist, where I have all my slaves working for me and, you know, working on my farm, you know, because that's what I have, because, you know, I believe something. But it's not, you know, that could be said to justify a lot of shitty things, you know. In the grand scheme of things, I'm pro-life, you know, and that's not a very popular opinion, but, you know, that, and I don't support illegal immigration. That's another conversation for another time. You know, but let me make it clear, like, I don't carry, I don't know, I'm not a Trump supporter. In fact, I've been seeing news around that there's just kind of more war stuff happening. That's stupid. I think there's a lot of stupid Republican shit going on right now. There's also a lot of pathetic Democrat shit. And I hate them both. I hate politics. And I just prefer to focus on whether or not you're gonna turn into nothing if you die or not, because to me that's what really matters, being an animal that lives in the world and doesn't concern myself with problems that I've created for myself to be worried about. Politics. But, you know, politics, in my opinion, are just problems that people created for themselves, and now that's what they're worrying about, is problems that they started solely for themselves because they didn't have enough problems and they needed a few more, you know? Which is why I don't have a lot of respect for human culture in general, but, you know. No, but this is just a big rant, you know? This is just me kind of letting my mouth run again based on what I'm thinking about. Because I kind of have a pinpoint topic right now, and that's life, you know? I'm a huge stoner. Huge stoner. Smoking weed since I was 11 years old. Because I've, you know, saw this guy actually make a video about what they don't tell you about weed. Really what they don't tell you is that it's mentally addictive. And, you know, it feels good, so you're gonna form some kind of addiction around it. And if you can't handle yourself, you're gonna get lazy, you're gonna get unmotivated, and you're gonna get miserable, and you're not gonna wanna do anything. You know what I mean? And it can really fuck with your sleep schedule, which, you know, that wasn't really the case last night. That was just kind of me playing video games. And then along came 1 a.m. and I was finally tired. But, you know. It's not like it's some deep secret about the risks of smoking weed. I mean, it's pretty common knowledge, I feel, about, you know, the risks, you know, because with everything there comes risks, you know. Just like when I took a double Joe's happy shot of acid, now I see a little black dot that just floats across my field of vision all the time, and it never goes away. And fucking visual snow is 100% worse. You know, it was already there, but it's not any better now, and in fact, it's quite worse, you know. But, you know, it's not, you know, there was still a lot of substance abuse before that, so it's not just that isolated experience that is the result of that. I also messed around with mushrooms a lot, because, you know, this is actually when I realized that being too spiritual is a weakness for me, because, you know, I thought what everybody thinks when they're going into it, you know? You're gonna achieve some sort of spiritual knowledge, but in reality, what you don't know isn't there, you know? What you can't, if you don't already know things to think about that are cool, you're not really gonna have anything to think about, and you're just gonna be delusional, and that's how it is, you know? Like, and me viewing it as a tool is something that's isolated within my own experiences. To anybody else, it's just a drug. And that's reasonable and valid, because it is. The only reason I view it as a tool is because I like drugs, so. I mean, not like cocaine. I would never do that, you know. I'm just kind of, I'm a party drug guy. Haven't tried MDMA or anything like that, just so far mushrooms, acid, and marijuana, and alcohol. And that's about it. You know, pretty basic, and that's good. It's good to stay basic because, you know, just go to Portland. How about that? I don't think I need to even think that's where I can stop with that right there. But, you know, For me, I feel like it's kind of the end of, like, recklessness. You know, I'm still young and dumb. I'm just not younger and dumber anymore. So, I don't know. I've said what I needed to say. You know, life has a lot of twists and turns and kicks in the nuts when you're not, you know, when you don't have everything. Yeah. Like, man, the one thing on my mind right now that what I really feel like I need, you'd think it'd be like money or shopping trip. But no, I need an ounce. You know what I mean? I want an ounce. That's my priority right now. Make the money, pay the bills, buy an ounce. That's like my plan right now, is just to get a little bit more, you know? Just found a really nice agate on the fucking tracks. That's really interesting. Can't believe I just found that. Damn. I'm actually not supposed to be on these right now. This is a really bad idea because I could actually get arrested and fined. But, oh yeah, this is another one of those fucking moments. Huh. Whatever. I don't really feel like I ever had my innocence, you know? I don't feel like I ever really was an innocent person. I feel like I was just kind of like, you know, just kind of always bothered. And at the end of the day, like, I talk about there being two faces to this whole equation, but in reality, it's more just like a bunch of rogue feelings that are just fucking everywhere all the time, bothersome and making problems for myself. But you know, I like to attach different feelings to different faces, and that's kind of why it's two faces instead of like a bunch of different, instead of basically just being inside out. You know, also, I don't know. That's not really the vision that I had anyways. Yeah. Oh, fuck. There we go. I just want things to work out because I feel like I think very animalistically, where it's just needs to be effective, you know? It just needs to work. That's it. It just needs to be the bare minimum of working. Sweet. God, I really hope I don't drop it. Damn it. Oh, wait, I put it in my shirt. Alright. At the end of the day, I don't know what I want. I don't know what a perfect world would look like for me, you know? Like, without sugarcoating it, all I really want is a little bit more weed to smoke and some video games to play. That's about it. You know, I don't want anything more in life. You know, because anything more in life is just like, what's even the point? You know, because I don't really have the desire for it. You know, I only want it because I feel like people are gonna judge me if I don't want it, which is something that's just becoming less and less strong every day. You know, a feeling that just that fades more and more into obscurity as time goes on, and I experience more. What I give a fuck about other people think just kind of matters less and less, because I'm starting to realize, like, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter unless you're rich. But I do like exploring. I wouldn't be honest if I wasn't saying I do like getting out and exploring and finding cool spots to smoke a joint, you know, maybe under a waterfall or something. But there's just no substance, is what it feels like. I don't feel as personified. Like my conscious presence in this world feels weak and brittle, and like my grip feels a little weak. Because my attitude towards controversy is, fuck it, I don't care. I don't have to deal with this. I barely feel like I'm alive to begin with. 'But in terms of like what parts of myself I allocate to certain things, Tim is usually just with Blue and not present. Tim is not here. I'm the Dornoch Keebler. You know, Tim is safe, as it should be. The Dornoch Keebler takes all the blunt force, because that's kind of what it is a shield, you know? 90% of the time, Tim makes no appearance on this channel. Like, maybe through the music, but even then, Dornoch Keebler music is becoming a thing. And Tim just kind of goes further and further into the back of my mind, where there really is no back, and there's no direction or anything, just information. So, like, context, kind of. But by no means am I sad right now. In fact, I feel very little. I either feel really happy, stressed, or nothing at all. Or curious. I guess I can't deny that. But it's not as often. And once you get there, something that it's easy to do is internally judge people for being too materialistic, when I myself am not materialistic like that. You know. But something I fail to realize is that these things matter to people because they haven't spent like half their life pushing their identity into the back of their mind, you know? And I don't know. this is kind of how I really am. Just less personality, less eye contact, more awkward quietness, and yeah, this is how it be. Just need to keep things working. Things are fine right now. They don't really need to be any better or any worse. In treatment, I learned about the conscious and unconscious self with this guy who wrote this big red book. And he was interesting. He was a pretty interesting fella. Just very spiritual. Nothing wrong with that. It's just something that I am not. On the base level, I like to think about beliefs as like filters for reality. You know, if you don't like the way something looks, you throw a filter over it and make it look pretty. In the sense, and in this case, it's in the sense where you're thinking about death, you know? Nothing doesn't look very pretty, but you know that it's like, well, no, you don't know, but, you know, from my perspective, in my opinion, my isolated opinion, I kind of know that it's probably just nothing, but, you know, nothing wrong with a little imagination. You know, that's the way I think about the idea of God, is like, you know, I know as long as I keep in my mind what the potential actuality of things is, then it doesn't really matter how speculative and crazy and wild I get with whatever I'm saying about God or whatever, because, you know, at the end of the day, I know what's true. For the, well, maybe not true, but like, you know, like what the most realistic possibility is, you know, from what I've observed of the realness of reality. Fuck it. Maybe I'd like there just to be an end to things. Because think about it. Does anybody here really want to be immortal? Would you really want to be alive forever and ever and ever? You know? And ever and ever, and it never ends. Ever. I mean, let's pretend like, you know, you don't have to deal with the part where everything disappears and goes away and you're just gonna live a happy la la life. Like, well, I don't know. I guess that would be, you know, that wouldn't be bad necessarily, but like, you know, in a more realistic setting with life's up and downs and the fact that, you know, there can never be existence without suffering. Those two things are two things that cannot, there's no such thing as existence without suffering, the way I see it. So, you know. So it's just like, there's no point. Eventually, things should have some level of a satisfying conclusion. Because it's unrealistic to, infinity is unrealistic. If anything, it's just a concept. And I've never seen anything infinite in my entire life. But that doesn't, well, depends on how you look at it, but, I've never seen any evidence of anything infinite. I've never seen any properties in the world that say, hey, something could be infinite, like, the only thing I've seen is cold, hard reality, and how, that's just kind of the base level, There's no point in thinking about anything like that because there's just other more interesting things to think about that you can actually find an answer to, and an interesting one at that, and not just, oh, we don't know. Sorry, question mark. Isn't that interesting? Because you just spent this 40-minute video talking about a big, giant pyramid of ideas. And then it ends with a question mark, because speculation. And in a sense, not even speculation is infinite, because eventually, you're gonna go over an idea that's already been gone over. But, it's fun, but if you're actually looking to expand your realm of knowledge, it's not interesting, in my opinion, because, sometimes finding out that something is disappointing is actually more interesting than finding out that it's not disappointing, like, not being able to just stay home is a pretty good example. It's like, this adds some scrapiness to things. It adds some texture, It's not just a nice piece of Jell-O, It's a cool rock. There's gonna be some crunchy things in there that you don't know what they are, and they kind of make you pause for a second. And, it just kind of sucks, but it's also pretty interesting. And it adds a bit of challenge, Although it kind of sucks because, it's a huge setback in terms of a few things that are a little hard to explain. Crazy ass rock. Can't believe I just found that. It's lit. At this point, I'm just kind of rambling. Just kind of talking out my circulation. So it's gonna have to be it for now. But I'm not gonna play any video games until the end of the day.